I am 64 years old. Last Tuesday I was with my wife, and I mean that in every sense of the word. I say that not to boast. I say it because 3 years ago I would have laughed at myself if someone had told me that was still possible. I had stopped believing it was, not because I had decided to, because my body had, quietly, made that decision for me, and I had run out of arguments to fight back. What I'm going to tell you today is not about medicine. It's not about a treatment. It's about something I found when I had already given up looking. Something so simple that for a long time I refused to take it seriously, because I was convinced that if it were real, some doctor somewhere would have mentioned it. None of them did. If you're watching this and something has been slipping away from you, the drive, the response, the feeling of being fully present in your own body, stay until the end. Because what changed everything for me is not what I expected. And it didn't come from a prescription pad. I've been where you are, probably exactly where you are, and I know what it costs to keep pretending everything is fine. Stay with me. What matters comes later. I remember the exact moment I understood something had changed permanently, or at least I thought it was permanent. It was a Sunday morning. My wife had moved close to me in a way that, 10 years before, would have set something in motion without any thought involved. My body just knew. That Sunday, nothing happened. I lay there, still, aware of every second passing. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. She got up a few minutes later to make coffee, and I stared at the ceiling, and what I felt wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you walk into a room and forget why you came. But the room is your own life. That was the beginning of a silence that lasted longer than I want to admit. I stopped initiating. I told myself I was tired. I told myself it was age, that this was what age looked like, that there was nothing wrong with accepting it. I had worked hard. I had earned rest. I repeated those things often enough that I half believed them. But a man knows when he is lying to himself. There's a specific quality to that lie. It has no weight. It doesn't settle. It just floats there, and you have to keep choosing it, every morning. I went to the doctor eventually. It took me almost a year to go, which tells you something about how much I wanted to hear what he had to say. He ran some blood work, asked me a few questions in a way that made me feel like a form being filled out, and told me my levels were within normal range for my age. That phrase, within normal range for my age, I have thought about it many times since. What he was telling me was that what I was experiencing was to be expected, that it was, in some sense, correct. I left his office with a pamphlet about cardiovascular health and a referral I never followed up on. A few months after that, I saw a different doctor. Same conversation, slightly different phrasing. He mentioned a medication. He said it carefully, like he was doing me a favor. I tried it twice. The first time it gave me a headache that lasted most of the next day. The second time nothing happened at all. I didn't go back. What I want you to understand is that by this point, it wasn't just about what was happening in the bedroom. I had started to feel quieter in general, smaller somehow. I would walk into a room full of people and feel like I was there at a reduced volume. My posture had changed. My patience had shortened. I snapped at small things. I withdrew from conversations I would have entered easily a few years earlier. My wife didn't say anything. She is not someone who says things directly. She is someone who becomes careful. And I could feel that carefulness, and I hated it, and I hated that I was the reason for it. That is the part no one talks about. The tiredness is one thing. The body not responding is one thing. But the feeling of becoming a quieter, smaller, less present version of yourself, that is the part that cuts deepest. That is the part that made me, finally, willing to try something I had always dismissed without giving it a fair hearing. His name, I'll call him R, was a man I'd known loosely for years. We had worked in the same trade for a long time, moved in the same circles, the kind of acquaintance where you know a man's face better than his story. He was in his early 70s at the time. I ran into him at the kind of place you run into people you haven't seen in a while. A local market, a hardware shop, somewhere ordinary. He looked good. Not good the way people look good in magazine photographs. Good the way a man looks when he's sleeping well and eating enough and is at peace with his own body. There was nothing forced about it. He was carrying himself easily, the way men do when they're not thinking about how they're carrying themselves. We talked for a while. I don't know exactly how we got to it. These conversations find their own way. But at some point I said something vague about feeling tired, about the years adding up. And he looked at me in a way that wasn't pitying, which I appreciated. He just nodded slowly, like he recognized the address. He told me he had been in the same place 5 or 6 years earlier, that he had tried the doctors, tried the medications, tried cutting out alcohol and losing weight and sleeping more, and that none of it had reached the root of what was actually happening. Then he said that about 3 years ago someone had pointed him towards something, a combination of natural things, plant-based, nothing invented in a laboratory, and that he had started taking it more out of resignation than belief, and that within a few weeks something had shifted. Not explosively, not like flipping a switch. Gradually, the way the light changes in the early morning. You don't see it happening, and then you notice that the room is different. I want to be honest about what went through my head when he said that. I didn't distrust him. I didn't think he was inventing anything. I just didn't believe a capsule could get there. I had lived 64 years in this body. I had worked with my hands most of my life, carried weight, gotten up early, eaten plainly. I wasn't the kind of man who took things. That was how I thought of it. Not as skepticism exactly, more as a settled position about who I was and what I needed. Men like me didn't need plant extracts to function. And the thought of finding out I was wrong about that, finding out that I had been without something for years that cost less than a meal, that was harder to swallow than the idea of just continuing as I was. He didn't argue with me. He just said what he'd noticed and left it there. He mentioned 2 things specifically. He called one of them fenugreek, said it was just a plant, something used in cooking for centuries, but that it had a specific action on the way the male body handles testosterone. That past a certain age, the body converts the testosterone it produces into something it doesn't need, something it then discards, and fenugreek slowed that conversion, kept more of what the body already made. The second thing was tribulus, a small, bitter plant, that he said worked at the beginning of the chain, sending a signal to the body to keep producing in the first place. 2 things. He wasn't rattling off a list. He named those 2 and stopped, because he understood that a list would have sent me in the other direction. I went home and didn't act on it for almost 3 weeks. I kept coming back to what he'd said, not because I believed it, but because I couldn't stop turning it over. Eventually, I ordered what he'd described less from conviction than from exhaustion. I was tired of the position I'd been holding. What I noticed first was not what I expected to notice. It was around the end of the 2nd week. I was doing something physical outside, something I did most mornings, routine work. And there was a quality to how I moved through it that I recognized from years earlier. Not performance, not even energy, exactly. Something quieter, the sensation of being in the body rather than dragging it. I didn't mark the day. I didn't call anyone. I went inside, had something to eat, and kept the thought to myself. But I kept noticing it, in the mornings especially. A steadiness that had been missing, not loudly missing, but absent the way something absent becomes ordinary until the moment it returns and you remember what ordinary used to feel like. The link to what I found is in the description below. No pressure, no urgency. It's just there if you want to take a look, read through the details, make up your own mind. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to consider what you've tried so far and whether the next thing you try ought to be different. But the supplement was only part of it, because around the same time, I started paying attention to something I had always taken for granted. And what I found changed the picture completely. The first thing I changed was my exposure to sunlight. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds too simple to matter. But stay with me, because the mechanism is not what most people think it is. And once you understand it, The simplicity stops feeling like a limitation and starts feeling like an oversight. I had read something, I don't remember where, some piece of research that crossed my path, about the relationship between vitamin D and the hormonal system in men, specifically about receptors for vitamin D that live directly inside the cells of the testicles, not near them, inside them. The University of Milan published research on this that received almost no attention outside academic circles. What those researchers found was that the same cells responsible for producing testosterone are covered in sites that specifically require vitamin D to function at full capacity. Without adequate vitamin D, those cells work at a fraction of their potential, not because they're damaged, but because they're missing a raw material they need. The way a furnace runs on low heat when it doesn't have enough fuel. It's not broken, it's just not fed. The mistake most men make is assuming they're getting enough. They're outside sometimes. They eat reasonably well. They think the box is checked. But vitamin D from sunlight requires direct skin exposure, not through glass, not through light clothing, for a specific duration. And the body's ability to synthesize it from sunlight drops significantly with age. A man at 60 produces roughly 40% less vitamin D from the same amount of sun as he did at 30. The exposure that was enough at 35 is not enough now. The math changed, and no one sent a notification. What I started doing was simple. 20 minutes, outside, arms and legs exposed when the weather allowed. Late morning, not at the hottest part of the day. Not every day without exception, but consistently. And I stopped taking it for granted. I paid attention to it the way you pay attention to something that matters. Within a few weeks, I noticed the afternoons were sharper. The fog that used to settle in after lunch, the kind where you're sitting upright but not quite present, started lifting. Not disappearing. Lifting. That distinction matters. If you have a doctor who measures your vitamin D regularly, ask for the number next time. Don't accept normal. Ask for the number. Men who are in the lower half of the normal range, not deficient, just in the lower half, show measurably different hormonal profiles than men in the upper half. The target most functional medicine practitioners work toward is between 50 and 80 nanograms per milliliter. Most men, even men who think they're fine, are sitting between 20 and 30. The second thing I changed was how I approached sleep. Not sleep habits exactly, something more specific than that. I had always been a light sleeper. I told myself it was my nature. I woke often, moved around, and in the morning felt like I had been doing something strenuous all night rather than resting. I didn't think of this as a hormonal problem. I thought of it as a personality trait. Then I came across something that reframed it entirely. The majority of the testosterone a man's body produces happens during deep sleep, specifically during the slow wave stages that occur in the first half of the night. Not throughout the night, the first half. If that sleep is shallow, interrupted, or delayed, the hormonal production that was supposed to happen doesn't happen, or happens partially. The body doesn't compensate later. It just produces less. Researchers from the University of Chicago demonstrated this in a study where they restricted healthy young men to 5 hours of sleep for 1 week. Testosterone levels dropped by 10 to 15% in 1 week. These were young men with fully functioning systems. For a man at 60, with a system that is already working at reduced capacity, interrupted sleep doesn't just slow the process, it can effectively halt it on the nights it happens. The mistake men make here is trying to manage sleep with willpower. Going to bed earlier, avoiding screens, the usual list, those things help. But the specific intervention I found useful was narrower. Temperature. The body enters deep sleep more readily when its core temperature drops. I started keeping the room cooler than I had before, not cold, just genuinely cool, and stopped eating anything significant in the 2 hours before sleeping. The body generates heat to digest food. That heat works directly against the temperature drop the brain uses as a signal to descend into deep sleep. Both changes together, cooler room, no late eating, added what felt like an hour of genuine rest to the same 7 hours I was already sleeping. I didn't sleep longer. I slept deeper. If you take one thing from this, your body is producing testosterone right now, tonight, while you sleep. Or it's trying to. Whether it succeeds depends in large part on what you do in the 2 hours before you close your eyes. The third thing I changed was something I had never associated with this problem at all. I started paying attention to what I was putting on my skin. Specifically, plastics that come into contact with heated food and drink. There is a class of chemical compounds, common in certain food containers, plastic bottles exposed to heat, and some canned food linings, that behave inside the body like a weak version of estrogen. They are not estrogen. They do not have the same strength, but they occupy some of the same receptors, and they interfere with the hormonal signal chain in ways that are measurable. The research on this comes from multiple independent bodies, including work published through the National Institutes of Health. And while the debate about the scale of the effect continues, the direction of the effect is not seriously disputed by anyone who has read the data honestly. The mistake is assuming the amount is too small to matter. A single exposure probably is too small to matter. But a man who reheats food in plastic containers, drinks from a plastic bottle that has been sitting in a warm car, and eats from packaging that has been heat-treated every day for years, is not talking about a single exposure. He is talking about a steady, low-level presence of estrogenic compounds in his system that his body cannot distinguish from the real thing. What I did was simple: glass or ceramic for anything heated. I stopped reheating in plastic entirely. I switched my travel bottle to stainless steel. It cost almost nothing. It required no willpower after the first week. And I mention it not because I can tell you exactly what it did for my numbers, but because removing a source of interference is not the same as adding a supplement. It's quieter, but it's real. I am 64 years old. I live in a small town where nothing much happens, which used to feel like a limitation and now feels like something I chose. My wife and I have been together for more than 30 years. We have had our seasons. What I have learned, and this is the plain version, the version that has no sales attached to it, is that the body does not fail all at once. It drifts. It drifts so slowly that you think you're adapting when you're actually shrinking. And the drift can be interrupted, not reversed entirely, not turned back to 25, but interrupted, redirected. The slope is not fixed. Tell me in the comments, have you ever tried talking to someone about this, or have you kept it to yourself? I'm asking because the silence around it is part of what makes it heavier, and I'm curious whether what I've said today matches anything you've been through. The link to what I've been using is in the description and in the pinned comment. I'm not telling you it will do for you exactly what it did for me. I'm telling you to go read it, look at what's in it, and make your own decision. That's all I'm asking. Here is the part I want to leave you with, because it's the part no one said to me, and I wish they had. The body has a window, not a deadline, a window. The tissue that responds to being addressed early responds differently than tissue that has been neglected for a decade. The relationship that still has room to feel different. That room does not stay open indefinitely. It narrows, quietly, with every year that passes without a change in direction. I nearly waited past mine. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because it's true, and because I know the tendency to think there will be a better time to start. A time when you're more sure, more ready, less skeptical. The habits I shared in this video and what I found in the description are not alternatives to each other. They're parts of the same thing. Neither one is the whole answer. Go read it. Take your time. Make up your own mind. The men I know who turned this around, they all did one thing the others didn't. They decided that what they had left was worth something. That's all it was.